Good morning. So I want to tell you a story. When I was younger, maybe 10 or 11, I was spending the summer in Michigan. Some of my extended family has some property up there. And this time I was at my grandparents' cottage. They had a nice cottage on a lake that connects to Lake Michigan. And in front of that cottage is a beach. And on that beach that year, there was a lot of seaweed, like a lot for that year. Most years there's seaweed. This year there was seaweed. And my grandfather hired me to clear out that seaweed from his beach. He wanted the work done. I wanted money to go buy ice cream and the other things that were available in town. And I was given a rake, a shovel, and a wheelbarrow to get this job done. And I thought the best way to get this job done quickly, because I wanted to get that money, you see, was to really just like dig that rake in and try and grab as much of the seaweed out in one go as possible. And I was at that for a while. And if any of you have ever raked seaweed off of a beach before, you know just how heavy that seaweed is, and you know just how terrible of a strategy I was using. So my grandfather, Eugene, or Gene to his friends, or Berber to his grandkids, he came out and saw just how hard I was working and just how little work was actually getting done. And he took the rake and he showed me how to rake just the top layer. It might take a little bit longer, but it was doable. You would get the work done. And once he was confident that I could handle the rest, he went back to the cottage, but not before reminding me that I should always be looking for ways to be working smarter, not harder. See any other bits of wisdom? Don't take a lazy man's load was one of his. You know, when you're coming back from the grocery store with the car, don't try and load up. Because you're just going to drop something and you're going to cause more work for yourself in the first place. Make a couple of trips, you know, good wisdom to be had. And those are a couple of the lessons I learned from Berber. I learned etiquette and grammar from his wife, Virginia, or Ginny, or again to the grandkids, Murmur. And on my mom's side, her mother, Sally, or Mimi to the grandkids, she encouraged my reading, and I honestly still have most of the books that she bought me over the course of my life. The one thing I took from her estate after she passed was a milk crate full of old books, including a couple of old poetry books, and I still have those all on my shelf. Now, her husband, Harvey, from him, I learned about loss. He died very shortly after I was born. And I don't have any memory of a man. All I know is that I was missing a grandfather. She did remarry, and there was a man in the house named Dr. John, and that was his name, including to the grandkids. Very kind man, but he wasn't my grandfather, and so, you know, learned that lesson as well. Now today, none of my grandparents are still alive, but their legacies do live on in their children, their grandchildren, and even their great-grandchildren. So quick trick to pass on from my grandmother Murmur about the grammar and etiquette and such. If you're ever confused, and English can be a very confusing language if you're not keeping track of it. If you're ever confused about to say whether like you and I or you and me, you know, I'm sure Bob, you've been told, oh, well, he and I, you and I, always you and I. No. Sometimes you and me is correct, and the only thing you got to do, instead of having to learn which is the direct object and the subjective case and all the various, you know, English major things you might need to know, is take away the you and or the he and from the front. Just replace the whole phrase you're trying to say with I or me, and whichever one of those is correct is still correct when you add someone else in front of you. So that's all you have to do. Quick trick from her to me to all of you. The English majors in the audience are like, yes, yes, I know. But for the rest of you. Anyway, legacy's kind of a funny thing. We usually think about legacy in one of two ways. So there's legacy in the past tense, like I was just talking about. My grandparents lived, they've died, and they left a legacy behind for me and for my parents and my siblings and my niece and cousins, lots of cousins. And that's kind of past tense legacy. The other way we think about legacy is in the future tense, what we want maybe to be remembered for. For instance, if you've ever been in the Northeast, New England specifically, you can't go more than a few miles without finding a building with Carnegie's name on the side. Andrew Carnegie, of course, the steel magnate back in the late 1800s, who donated tons and tons of money to libraries and hospitals and universities. Carnegie Hall, named after him. He was also exploited his labor force and was terrible toward unions. He was a complicated guy, but he was very focused on his legacy. That's why he gave so much money, put his name on so many things. And I'm sure you can think of many other folks in this area. The Bass Hall bears a family name, right? That's not there by accident. They chose to put the name on the building. It's a wonderful building. I've been to amazing performances there, but that's part of the Bass family legacy. And so that's kind of future tense, right? What are you going to be remembered for? And those are fine. I'm not saying we can't think of past tense legacies. They're useful. We've learned from them. We should continue to learn from them. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be worried about your future, but I think that maybe on a day-to-day basis, we should be more concerned about legacy in the present tense. In the hit musical Hamilton, and don't worry, I'm not going to sing this, Lin-Manuel Miranda has the main character, Alexander Hamilton, define legacy as planting a seed in a garden that you never get to see. And so legacy is what you do every day. When you let someone merge in front of you in traffic, or hold the door for someone whose hands are full, or when you greet another human being with the respect and dignity that they have and deserve, regardless of their race or gender, economic status, or even their favorite sports team, you leave a legacy. If you want to be remembered as a good person, and I know I do, then you have to actively choose to be a good person in the present tense. So, kind of moving over to why am I talking about this in a church today? Unitarian Universalism, for those that don't know, follows a very congregational model. We don't have very much in the way of like a hierarchy in this faith. There is no pope, for instance. UU is you and me and us. And there's no single authority to tell us how to do our religion. Even our 7 principles were voted on by a committee, and if there's anything more UU than that, I don't know what it is. And our congregation, this building, the one we have a lot of control over because we are the congregation, we're building our legacy every day. Over 20 years ago, a small and dedicated group started this church. After that, when it got too big for basements and living rooms, we moved into a strip mall down off McCart until that burned down. The church wasn't targeted, the insurance office next door was. But a lot of the chairs that you're sitting in today survived that fire. This chalice survived that fire. If you've never taken a good close look at it, there's some burn marks all throughout it. We almost lost this very good piece of art that has been with us for a long time, but it survived the fire, as did the congregation. It wasn't easy, I've been told. I wasn't there at the time. We had to move into, I didn't write it down. Was it Bethel? Yeah, Bethel. It was a Jewish temple. They let us use space and time there on Sunday mornings to have our services until we could find a new place. And we eventually did find a new place. This building we took over from the Unity Church that was here back in the day. And one thing, I guess, that kind of goes along with the legacy is on the outside of that door right there, behind the welcome desk, attached to the wall is a little piece of scripture from the Torah, which is a gift from Bethel to sort of remind us of our time there. It's a very common thing to have in a Jewish place of worship. So we've collected legacy and bits and pieces from all the places we've been, and we're here now in our own building. You know, we don't have renters anymore, we don't have a tenant anymore. This building is ours. And we use this building and have been using this building for some great things. We host the Smart Recovery Program once a month. And that's, for those that don't know, that is a support group for people who are struggling with addiction. And we've been hosting them for a very long time, and they've been doing very good work in these walls, and I believe they'll continue to do so. We provide space for the Fort Worth Humanists. That's how Melissa and I found this church originally. We went to those meetings, and they said, "You should come to church." And we said, "Oh, we're not church people." And here I am in seminary and the board president. Funny what a difference 8 years can make. Our members and our minister reach out to the surrounding community. For those of you who were here, you might remember one of the first things Reverend Sherry did after we called her to serve this community was to go and take part in a protest at Energy Transfer Partners in Dallas to protest against the North Dakota pipeline going through Native American reservations and threatening the water supply there. Our banner and yellow t-shirts can often be seen at local pride events, at political protests, and at the Samaritan House. Our Social Justice Committee answers the many and unique calls of our time to help how and when we can. And if you know Cindy Fountain and the others on the committee, that is often. Through Kiva, we have invested thousands of dollars in microloans, mostly to small businesses started by women all over the world. We donated just last week bags and bags and bags of food for Thanksgiving meals for families that wouldn't be able to afford their own. If you were in the back between services, you saw those getting sorted. That was a lot of food we donated. And right now, I'm sure it'll be out in between the services, we have the Angel Tree willing to donate. This is work done by this church to help our community. This is stuff we are doing right now to help. I mean, even today, the collection we took, unless you put it as your pledge, 100% of that is going to the Wellman Project, and it is dedicated to helping teachers. And as a high school teacher, I can only say thank you. So we do a lot as a community, as a congregation. And this building isn't what does it. There's not some magical force that moves that. It's you and it's me and it's all of us making this effort, going out and doing this work. And it's good work. And it leads me to really one of my favorite things about our faith is UUs. That this faith, this religion is not one of shout nots. You look through the 7 principles, I don't see a single shout not. Thou or thee or you or anyway. It's a religion of doing. You do respect others. You do promote and take part in the democratic process. You do, you do, you do. And that has really led to our activists defining this faith. We welcome, not just tolerate, but we welcome our LGBTQ siblings, our immigrants, atheists, theists, agnostics, pantheists, people with disabilities, the temporarily able-bodied, and everyone in between. Quick aside, I saw a post on Twitter the other day. One time I'll talk about Twitter today, I promise. There was a member of a particular Christian church. I didn't see the name of the church, but he was on Twitter arguing that gay members of his church were allowed to participate in the full life of the congregation. And the reason this was being shared around wasn't because of that. That would be great. That would be wonderful. There was a but, though. But we don't marry gay people at our church. And someone had a wonderful reply, and that's really what was getting sent around, the reply. And the reply was, then they aren't allowed to take part in the full life of your church, are they? Now, thankfully, the UU Church and UU churches are not unique in allowing full access to our LGBTQ members to the entire, church life, and including marriage. There's a lot of churches out there that are doing that, and I'm a big fan anytime I see that happen. But we were early adopters. The earliest record I could find was in the 1950s. There was a church in Canada that performed what was called a ceremony of union for a gay couple. Couldn't do a marriage in Canada at the time, but the Unitarian church up there did what they could. And Unitarian churches in America followed suit in the 60s and 70s. I remember before the Supreme Court came down and said we can't discriminate marriage based on gender anymore. I remember a similar ceremony happening here. As years ago at this point, but we've done that here too. And obviously after the Supreme Court decision, we perform weddings in this building and as part of this community as well, as we should. And the UUA offers a welcoming congregation certification for congregations that want to be out and proud with our support for LGBTQ members and guests. And that's a certification that Westside has held for years. You may have seen that on the website. You may have seen the wonderful quilt that's still hanging up. I forget exactly where it is with things moved around, but it's still up. And it's the chalice with the rainbow. And something that we're very out front about. And we don't just fight for one group or one community. We fight for animal rights, we fight for environmental justice, we fight for economic justice, and each of those fights are important. Each of those fights are a small piece of our principles that we follow. So, you will change this world by being a part of it, just by being here. You will change Unitarian Universalism by being a part of it, by being a part of this congregation. For some, this will be something, what they might think is small. I promise you it's not small. But that might seem small to people. Maybe membership on a committee, like our award-winning Green Sanctuary Committee, or the newly formed AIM Committee that deals with and is promoting accessibility and inclusion for all in this church. Maybe you'll sing in the choir or volunteer to help with the Peace Corps with our coffee on Sunday mornings. Maybe your impact on this faith might be on the larger faith as opposed to just this congregation. Maybe you'll join one of our larger organizations like NTUC, the North Texas UU community. There's 13 member congregations in that all around. And they're a pretty great organization. Or maybe you'll attend the UUA General Assembly as a delegate. Maybe you'll end up in the leadership one day. Maybe you're going to be fortunate later on in life that you'll be able to make large charitable gifts to this congregation or to the wider UU world. And if you're not sure where to start with that, I would take a look into the Wake Now Our Vision program. It's a thing the UUA has set up where if you promise to donate some later, they'll release some of the money to the church early. And also keep an ear out for our upcoming stewardship program for the year. I've got a little bit of an inside information on what the theme's going to be, and I can't wait. And I promise, this is not about to turn into the Sermon on the Amount. That's going to come later, and it's going to be Reverend Cherry. But my wife and I will be doing our best to raise our pledge this year. And if you're in a place where that's possible, please consider it. If you're not, trust me, I've been there. I get it. We're good. And whether the way you change this religion is going to be through your time or your talent or your treasure, how are you going to change this church? How are you going to change this religion? You are, whether you want to or not. It's just a matter of how. I don't know. Maybe the real question is, what's the point? Why go to all this effort to support Unitarian Universalism in general and West Side in particular? Well, as an educator, I model for my students. I model technique and skills in math class and in history class. And more importantly, I think sometimes I model behavior. And parents absolutely model behavior for their children. I have some nieces and nephews, I have cousins, I have friends with young children, and the amounts that these kids pick up without even trying amazes me. So most of us have had opportunities to sort of model behavior, whether we knew it or not at the time. And what I think is that Unitarian Universalism can be a model for a society that we want to move toward. A society that is multicultural, multi-theistic, multi-ethnic, et cetera, a good model of that for a rapidly shrinking world. Thanks to the internet, thanks to globalism, thanks to instant communications worldwide, the world's not as big as it used to be. And people are not very comfortable. I don't know if you've listened to the news lately. Some people are not very comfortable with all of these different viewpoints and different things. And I think Unitarian Universalism is uniquely suited to be a model of a multi sort of society like that. And when politicians talk about closing ourselves off from the world and they try to find any excuse they can not to help our fellow man, our very existence serves as a counter-argument. We can let people in that we don't know. We can be at church with people that don't believe the same things as we do. We do it every day. Some weeks it's harder than others. Some weeks it seems very easy, but it's possible. It absolutely is possible. I mean, I was incredibly proud of the donations we were able to send to Raices and the work that our Social Justice Committee continues to do to help asylum seekers reunite with their children and the rest of their families. I mean, imagine expanding this even further. UU candidates for governor or the Senate or even president. The last Unitarian president we had was Taft. That was 100 years ago. We're due for another one. I mean, we could have UU CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. We could have UU aid organizations, worldwide aid organizations. I mean, imagine our effect on this nation's priorities if a few of us were in positions of authority. We would be able to feed the hungry, house the homeless, protect the environment, and uplift the marginalized, all without some Calvinist view of who deserves to be saved. We all deserve to be saved. We all deserve to be saviors. Speaking of saviors, Martin Luther, the Protestant Reformation one, not the civil rights one, is said to have remarked, "Even if I knew that tomorrow the world would go to pieces, I would still plant an apple tree today." And when I first saw that quote from Martin Luther, the great Protestant Reformation writer of the 95 Theses, I thought, wow, that's perfect for my talk on legacy. And so I wanted to do a thing. I'm a history teacher, so I want to do my due diligence and look into the quote, make sure he said it. There's a lot of things on the internet that aren't necessarily true, so I thought I'd go digging. And I found a few sources that definitely agreed with me that he was talking about legacy and that no matter how bad the world looks, you should prepare for tomorrow. Do things today to prepare for tomorrow, even if the whole world is coming apart. And a few sources said he never said it at all. Now, it's not in his writings anywhere. It's just some quote that got attributed to him one day and down the road, and now we say Martin Luther said that. And there were some sources that just said, actually, it's about how much he loved apples. Which is actually true. Like, there's sources that make that argument. It's also a very good joke, but there are sources that make that argument. So maybe he said it, maybe he didn't. Maybe he just really liked apples, and maybe it was actually about legacy. I'm going to go with legacy. And to go to someone else who's taught me a lot of things, my grandmother, she taught me to always try and leave a place at least a little bit better than you found it. It's why I teach. That's why I'm in seminary. It's why I'm on a couple of the committees here at this church. That's why I donate to charity and hold doors open and march in pride parades, so that hopefully, when I die, this world will have been at least a little bit better of a place for me being here. And not to go out on too much of a bummer, but I don't think anyone in this room is really a stranger to death. If you were to ask 3 different Unitarian Universalists about what happens after you die, you'd get at least 4 different answers. And maybe we don't know what happens to you after you die, but we do know what happens here on earth after you die. Your story will be told by the ones who knew you, the ones who loved you. Give them a good story to tell.